The wind off Ashford Pier was a bitter, slashing thing, carrying the frozen breath of Lake Michigan. It clawed at the glass skin of the Halcyon Tower, where, 30 stories up, the world was a universe of warmth and shimmering light. Inside the grand ballroom, a fundragoizing gala was in full swing. The noise was a polished roar of clinking crystal, expensive laughter, and a string quartet sawing politely through Vivaldi. Mooring lights from the pier below reflected like scattered diamonds on the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the night into a fractured jewel box. Aaliyah Brooks moved through it all, a ghost in a crisp black uniform. Her tray, loaded with champagne flutes, felt heavier than it should. She was a single mother from the South Side, and this job, this night, was a bridge to next month's rent. She navigated the glittering clusters of Chicago's elite, not just as a waitress, but as a dancer performing a complex choreography of survival. Each step was measured, each pivot precise, her smile a fixed, professional mask. Did you hear her? A woman dragaped in silver sequins whispered to a man with a face like polished driftwood. She asked me if I wanted more. Clear as day, right off the blocks. South Side Special, the man rumbled, his vest a tight, glossy black. They let anyone in these days? Look at those shoes. Probably cost $20. Aaliyah's spine stiffened into a rod of ice. The shoes had cost $35 on clearance, and they were killing her feet. She kept moving, her focus locking on the empty glass in a judge's hand 10 feet away. She balanced the biting sting of their words against the weight of her daughter's needs. The paycheck always won. Pride was a luxury she filed away with her dreams, to be revisited on the first of the month. On the terrace, shielded from the wind by thick panes of tempered glass, Cassian Morello leaned against the marble balustrade. He was a silhouette against the city's neon sprawl. To the world, he was the billionaire philanthropist behind the Orion House logistics empire, a man who moved freight and capital with surgical precision. To the shadows, he was the Dawn, the head of an organization that operated by rules far older and colder than the laws debated in the gleaming buildings across the river. His eyes, the color of weathered steel, were not enjoying the view. They were scanning, assessing, cataloging. It was the habit of a man who had survived a den of wolves by becoming the apex. A polite smile was fixed on his face, a masterpiece of social camouflage that never, ever touched his eyes. His aide, Rook, materialized beside him, a man so nondescript he was practically invisible. "Sir," Rook murmured, his voice barely a vibration. We counted 3. Valentin Dragogo's men, posing as audio-visual crew, and 1 at the bar. Cassian's smile did not flicker. He merely nodded. A fractional movement. "Dragogo is testing the perimeter. Let him." Inside, Aaliyah was cornered near the silent auction tables by a group of men comparing watches. As she offered the tray, one of them, flushed with bourbon, looked her up and down. "I'll bet she only knows how to carry a tray," he slurred, loud enough for the entire corner to hear. "She probably can't even read the menu." A wave of brittle laughter followed. It struck Aaliyah like a physical blow. Her hand wavered, just for a second, the glasses chiming a tiny, panicked alarm. She saw their faces smug, careless, entitled. From the terrace, Cassian had turned. He saw the incident. He saw the laughter. He saw the tremor in her hand. There was no explosion, no righteous fury. Cassian Morello did not operate on impulse. He simply tilted his champagne flute, a gesture of casual contemplation. With his other hand, he discreetly tapped the side of his timepiece. A tiny red light, invisible to anyone more than 2 feet away, confirmed it was recording. His gaze moved from face to face in the laughing group, indexing them, filing their features away in a mental vault where slights were stored until they matured into liabilities. His eyes finally settled on the waitress. He watched her straighten her back, the mask of professionalism snapping back into place. Harder this time. And he saw her hand, the one that wasn't holding the tray, lift to her throat. She wasn't checking for a run in her stocking or adjusting a lapel. Her fingers were curled around a small, delicate chain. He zoomed in with his gaze, his focus narrowing until the entire ballroom blurred except for that one detail, a small, silver pendant. 4 letters, Nova. Just as he read the name, a bank of spotlights from the shipyard below flashed upwards, illuminating a new cargo vessel. The sudden glare washed out the ballroom, and in that stark, actinic light, Aaliyah shivered. It was a visceral, full-body tremor, a primal instinct warning that the wind had, in fact, changed. The interruption was broken by the master of ceremonies, and now, a man whose generosity makes nights like this possible. Please welcome the founder of the Orion House Foundation, Mr. Cassian Morello. Polite applause rippled. Cassian moved from the terrace, gliding through the crowd with an economy of motion that was almost predatory. He took the stage, adjusting the microphone not out of necessity, but to command the silence. When he spoke, his voice was a low, resonant baritone that cut through the ambient noise like a serrated knife through ice. "Thank you," he said. The room quieted instantly. "Tonight we are here to support the future, but the future is built on the present, and in the present, many are forced to defend themselves not from criminals in alleys, but from economic predators in boardrooms." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "That is why, tonight, Orion House is seeding a new initiative, the Economic Victims Defense Fund, a $20 million fund dedicated to protecting those who are silenced, intimidated, or dismissed by the very people who hold the power." The room was utterly still. This was not the speech they had expected. In a dark corner near the service doors, a guest, visibly drunk and angry at the somber turn, decided he wanted another drink. He saw Aaliyah heading for the kitchen. "Hey, girl," he bellowed, grabbing for her tray. "I'm talking to you." Aaliyah tried to pivot, but he lunged, his hand closing on the silver rim. Cassian, still on stage, merely inclined his head, a gesture so small it was almost imperceptible. Before the drunkard's fingers could tighten, Rook was there. He had not been there a second before. He was simply present, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. He did not touch the guest. He placed his body between the man and Aaliyah, his hand resting gently on the man's forearm. "Sir," Rook's voice was impossibly calm, "I believe your car is ready." It was not a request. The man suddenly sobered by the cold finality in Rook's eyes. Deflated, he mumbled, straightened his jacket, and was guided away, vanishing from the floor as if he had never been. The wave of disturbance was smoothed over before it could truly form. Aaliyah took a single shuddering breath. On stage, Cassian Morello's steel-colored eyes found hers across the expanse of the silenced, glittering room. He hadn't missed a beat. Aaliyah slipped into the thrumming, pressurized atmosphere of the back kitchen, the swing door hissing shut behind her. For one blessed second, the noise of the gala was replaced by the clatter of plates and the sharp, clean smell of bleach. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She leaned against a stainless steel counter, closing her eyes, and the glittering ballroom dissolved. Instantly, she was somewhere else. She was at Northbridge Hospital, 1 year ago. The memory was so vivid it carried a scent, stale antiseptic, and the metallic tang of fear. The pediatric ward at 3 a.m, the lights a harsh, buzzing fluorescent yellow. Nova, her daughter, had been burning with fever, her small body first rigid, then shaking in the grip of a febrile seizure. Aaliyah's own screams had felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. She had sat by the tiny hospital bed for 2 days straight, holding Nova's hand, watching the steady, reassuring beep of the monitor, and she had made a promise. Whispered into the sterile air, "I will never let anyone look down on you because of me, baby," she'd murmured, her voice raw. "Mommy will be so strong. I will never let anyone think we are less." That promise was her armor. It was the steel in her spine. It was the reason she could walk back out that door, into that room of wolves, and smile. Across the ballroom, Cassian Morello had descended from the stage. The applause for his blunt, almost threatening speech had been hesitant, but a senator was now shaking his hand. a look of manufactured approval on his face. Cassian's smile was a perfect, polished mask. He saw the senator's eyes, the quick, calculating flicker that assessed Cassian's wealth and influence. The man's practiced politeness triggered a memory for Cassian, sharp and clear, a damp kitchen in the Riverton district, the smell of rust and boiling tomatoes. He was a boy, watching his mother, her knuckles white as she scrubbed a pot. She was talking about their landlord, a man who smiled while he threatened them. Politeness. Mio caro, his mother had said. Her voice quiet but harder than steel. It is the silk glove of violence. You use it when you must handle something that will burn, or something you intend to break. Cassian had never forgotten. His politeness was a weapon, honed to a razor's edge. Aaliyah emerged from the kitchen, her tray reloaded, her composure rebuilt. She was a fortress, but inside the walls, the numbers were running in a frantic, familiar loop. Rent, $700. Due on the 1st, Nova's allergy medication. That's $89. Cannot skip it. The electric bill, $105, and they won't extend again. And then, the dream that felt like a stone in her stomach, Lakeside Charter Elementary. The application fee alone was $50, a sum she'd been trying to save for 2 months. The tuition was astronomical, a distant galaxy away, but the children there. They learned violin. They went on field trips to museums. Not just the park, they were safe. The thought of Nova walking those halls was the only thing that made this night bearable. Cassian stood near a marble column, a picture of detached interest, looking at a tablet. To the guests, he was checking donations. But not in the way they thought. His screen showed the donation log, but his custom software was highlighting 3 names: Apex Global Shipping, Rivermouth Holdings, Tri-State Logistics. All had pledged 6-figure sums in the last hour. All were shell companies. All, he knew, were controlled by Valentin Dragogo. Dragogo was seeding the fund, attempting to either gain leverage or to mock him with laundered money. A flicker of a smile, genuine and cold, touched Cassian's lips. Dragogo thought he was laying a trap. He was walking directly into one. The bait was perfect. Aaliyah offered a flute of champagne to a woman whose diamond necklace was worth more than Aaliyah's car, her apartment, and her entire life combined. As Aaliyah leaned forward, her starched black sleeve rode up an inch, revealing the inside of her left wrist. Under the chandelier's light, a small, pale scar, a perfect crescent moon, was visible against her dark skin. She touched it unconsciously. It was a reflex. It did not come from a childhood fall. It came from the manager at her last job, a man with sour breath and greasy hair, who had accidentally slammed the heavy walk-in refrigerator door on her arm when she'd politely declined his offer of a ride home. She'd not reported him. She had needed the reference. She had swallowed the humiliation, just as she swallowed the insults tonight. Cassian's gaze lifted from the tablet, sweeping the room not as a guest, but as a general. His mind was a blueprint of the battlefield. Exit 4, by the orchestra. Blocked by a champagne tower, a fire hazard and a tactical error. Rook will move it. Camera blind spot. Junction B by the terrace doors. That's where the team will extract. Kite 1 and Kite 2, his sniper and overwatch team, were on the roof of the adjacent building, their thermal scopes cutting through the dark. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Aaliyah moved to the VIP table. Senator Harrison was laughing loudly, but his daughter, a small girl around 9 or 10 years old in a stiff velvet dress, was quiet. She was not eating her elaborate dessert. She was watching Aaliyah, her gaze intense and curious. As Aaliyah moved to clear a plate, the girl looked up, her eyes serious. She offered Aaliyah a small, shy, conspiratorial smile. It was a tiny, unexpected flicker of light in the oppressive dark. Aaliyah, caught off guard, felt the iron plating of her professionalism crack. She smiled back, a real smile, one that reached her eyes, just for the girl. It was a shared, silent moment of humanity. Then she dipped her head. Her training took over, and she continued her work. Cassian saw it all. He saw the girl's admiration. He saw Aaliyah's genuine, unguarded response. He watched Aaliyah turn away, her shoulders still squared, her dignity a tangible force field. A strange, unfamiliar sensation loosened something in his chest. The permanent, faint line of tension between his eyes softened for a half a second. He was reminded, in a jarring flash, of what human looked like before it was forged into armor or a weapon. The moment was fleeting. As Aaliyah passed a cluster of men near the terrace doors, their words were sharp and loud. "She's certainly persistent," one said, sipping his brandy. "I heard she begged the catering manager for this shift. Must have needed the money." Aaliyah heard it. She felt the words like tiny, stinging needles, but she only shifted the weight of the tray, rotated her aching wrist, and kept her back as straight as a steel rod. Her spine was her shield. Cassian heard it, too. His gaze hardened back to polished steel. The recording was still active. The silk glove was back on. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, the old Don's gravelly Sicilian wisdom. "You do not teach dogs to be quiet, nipote. You make them need to be quiet." He looked at the men, then at Aaliyah's retreating, resilient form. A lesson would be taught. The night wore on, the air growing thick with champagne and self-congratulation. Aaliyah was clearing plates from a table of real estate developers when one of them, a man named Ivers, with a face flushed from drink and self-importance, raised his glass. He caught Aaliyah's arm as she passed, his grip just firm enough to be a command. "A moment, gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming. The table quieted. "I'd like to propose a toast." He gestured with his glass toward Aaliyah, who was now trapped, her tray of half-eaten desserts held hostage. "To diversity." A few polite hears rippled. "It's just wonderful," Ivers continued, his eyes gleaming. "Having this young woman here, working so hard." He smiled, a wet, patronizing expression. "It just makes me feel, well, humane." The table erupted in appreciative, braying laughter. They were laughing at his wit, at her expense, at the sheer, unapologetic audacity of his privilege. Aaliyah's face went numb, a cold mask of service. She could feel the heat of a dozen eyes on her, a specimen under glass. She did not look down. She did not flinch. Instead, she met Ivers's gaze with a calm, steady professionalism. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear, warm, and utterly precise. "Sir," she said, her tone perfectly courteous, "diversity is when the menu has more options, not when the staff becomes one." The silence that fell was not a pause. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of a crystal glass shattering on marble, a sudden, shocking void. Ivers's smile froze, then curdled. The laughter died in the throats of his companions. Then, one sound, sharp and deliberate, broke the spell. Clap. Cassian Morello stood 10 feet away, his hands coming together in a slow, measured applause. Clap, clap. "Bravo," he said, his voice carrying easily through the sudden hush. He walked toward the table, his gaze not on Ivers, but on Aaliyah. "Anyone who jests that well," he continued, his eyes finally shifting to the developer, "deserves their tip first." Before Ivers could respond, Cassian tapped his phone. On the enormous digital screen behind the orchestra, the one displaying the donation ticker, a new line item appeared. "Donation Halcyon staff tip pool $10,000 from Orion House." The entire room saw it, $10,000, a sum that was both a reward for Aaliyah and a spectacular public rebuke of Ivers. It was a king's gesture, a move of such casual, dismissive power that Ivers actually shrank in his chair. A woman at a nearby table, her face tight with disapproval, leaned over to her companion. "She's insolent," she whispered, the words sharp, utterly unprofessional. Aaliyah heard her. She simply inclined her head, a fractional bow of acknowledgement. "I am doing my job, ma'am." She picked up the last plate and turned to leave. "Miss Brooks." Cassian's voice was quiet, but it stopped her instantly. She turned. He was standing in front of her. He was closer than she had expected. He was just a man, but the air around him felt different, denser. "You look like you could use some fresh air," he said. It was not a question. "The terrace is this way. Take a moment." He gestured at her, not touching her, but opening a path. Aaliyah looked from him to the service door, her escape route, but this was a command from the man who had just thrown down $10,000 in her name. She nodded, her throat tight, and walked toward the terrace. He followed. He didn't walk beside her, which would have implied they were equals. He didn't walk behind her, which would have implied a threat. He walked half a step behind and to the side, a position of observation, of protection. He maintained the boundary of power, but he was a physical barrier between her and the rest of the room. The glass door slid shut, and the noise of the gala was instantly muffled. Replaced by the howl of the wind off the lake, the air was so cold it was a shock, stinging her lungs and making her eyes water. She wrapped her arms around herself, the thin uniform offering no protection. Cassian stood several feet away, leaning against the balustrade, looking out at the dark, churning water. "There's a code of silence in rooms like that," he said, his voice low, not competing with the wind. "They expect you to absorb the insult. They expect you to be grateful for the privilege of being abused." He turned his head, his steel-colored eyes fixing on her. "Tonight, I'm breaking it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a lapel pin, brushed platinum, in the shape of a stylized constellation, the mark of Orion House. "This is a temporary guest pin," he said. "It gives you level 4 access. My internal staff, my security, they will recognize it if you find yourself anywhere you do not wish to be. Show it, and they will bring you to me. No questions." He held it out. Aaliyah stared at it. It was a lifeline from a man who lived in a world she couldn't imagine. Part of her, the proud, self-reliant part, wanted to refuse it. She was not a damsel. She was a survivor, but then she thought of Nova. She thought of the walk to her car in the unlit garage at 2 a.m. She thought of the men in that room and the men who had just been escorted away. For Nova. She reached out and took the pin. Her cold fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. "Thank you," she whispered. She slipped it into the pocket of her apron. His phone vibrated. He glanced at it, his expression unreadable. A message from Rook. "Dragogo is planting soft mines. The finale is soft violence." A small, cold smile touched Cassian's lips. Soft violence, humiliation, social ruin. It was Dragogo's favorite game, an old, tired story. He preferred his violence to be quick, decisive, and final. He slid the phone back into his pocket and stepped to the terrace door, pushing it open just enough for his voice to carry back inside. He didn't a word to a passing coordinator, and a moment later, the orchestra quieted. The MC looked confused. "One final announcement," Cassian said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics, silencing the renewed chatter. He was still standing in the doorway, a figure balanced between the cold night and the warm, decadent room. "As many of you know, the Orion House is the primary stakeholder in the new North River port agreement," he said. The room went very quiet. The North River deal was worth billions. "My foundation, which you've so generously supported tonight, believes that dignity is not a privilege. It is a right. Effective immediately, any individual or any company represented by an individual found to be treating event staff, service workers, or any other personnel with disrespect will be permanently blacklisted from all North River contracts and properties." He let that sink in. It was a declaration of war, delivered with the politeness of a business memo. He was tying their greed to their manners. He had just made Aaliyah the most protected person in the room. His gaze found Ivers, who now looked pale and ill. Cassian let the door slide shut, leaving the room to digest his decree. He looked back at Aaliyah. Before he could speak, a new variable entered the game. Down on the pier, far below, a series of bright, sharp beams of light cut through the dark. Security flashlights, moving fast, they were converging on the private service dock. A sleek, low-profile boat, dark as the water, was nosing up to the pilings, its engines off. The game had just changed. The soft violence was over. Cassian's focus did not waver from the dark water, but a command, sharp and silent, was already in motion. through a bone conduction earpiece. So small it was mistaken for jewelry, the voice of Kite 1. His rooftop overwatch was immediate and flat. Ground level, 3 bogies, ashore from the vessel, moving to service entrance. B, black gear, armed. Cassian gave a single, imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging a stray thought. His gaze shifted, finding Rook in the ballroom's dim perimeter. Rook was already moving. He was a master of non-presence. A man who could detach himself from a wall and be gone before the eye registered the movement. He slipped through a high-gloss mahogany door marked private. His own team of 3 Shadows men who had been posing as a bartender, a guest and a security guard detaching from their roles and converging on the service corridor. They did not run. They glided. They were a silent, choreographed response, disappearing into the building's veins while the heart of the gala continued to beat. Oblivious, Aaliyah, her skin still prickling from the cold and the intensity of Cassian's protection, turned to go back inside. She needed the familiar clatter of the kitchen, the safety of work. She pushed through the main swing doors, the sudden blast of heat and noise a temporary relief. But as she headed toward the staff-only exit that led to the freight elevators, a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. The door was blocked. A heavy industrial catering cart, the kind used for moving hundreds of plates, was jammed in front of it at an angle. It was not parked. It was wedged, a deliberate obstruction. Her intuition, honed by years of navigating the South Side, screamed this was not an accident. 2 young interns, their faces shiny with exertion, were wiping down a steel counter nearby. "Hey," Aaliyah said, her voice dropping into a register of low, urgent command. "I need you to take a break. With me. Now." One of them looked up, confused. "But Mr. Haynes said we had to—" "Now." The word was not a request. It was a shield. The interns, startled by the steel in her tone, dropped their cloths and followed. She didn't lead them toward the blocked exit or into the chaotic ballroom. She pulled them toward the massive, humming, walk-in cold room. "Go to the back left corner," she ordered, pushing the heavy door open. "I need an emergency count on the fillet. Do not come out. Do not open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand?" They nodded, shivering, their eyes wide. Aaliyah pulled the heavy door shut, listening for the thump and click of the vacuum seal. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen, sending a text to the new catering manager. 1 word, lock. She prayed he understood it meant the main kitchen doors, from the outside. She grabbed a fresh, empty tray, a prop, a shield, and pushed back out into the ballroom. Cassian had already re-entered the main floor. He was a picture of effortless charm, already deep in conversation with a city alderman. He knew the first rule of managing a herd: the shepherd must be the calmest animal in the field. Wolves only attack the deer that bolts. He smiled, lifted a glass, and kept the rhythm of the party steady. Aaliyah began clearing glasses near the edge of the dance floor, her senses stretched taut as a violin string. She felt him before she saw him, a man, not a guest. He wore the black polo and credentials of the audio-visual team. He moved too close, his body brushing her back as he passed, his head dipping to her ear. "Heard you're the $10,000 girl," he whispered, his voice a greasy rumble, his breath hot and sour with whiskey. "I'd like to find out just how good that service is." The obscenity was a physical blow. Aaliyah didn't think. She reacted. It was a smooth, practiced catering pivot, a movement she had made 1,000 times. But this time, her tray of half-empty glasses, whiskey, wine, champagne tilted, a cascade of sticky, alcoholic liquid splashed directly onto the man's neck and the collar of his black shirt. The smell of stale booze was immediate, a potent, staining mark. The man recoiled, sputtering, his hand flying to his wet shirt. "You bitch!" Across the room, Cassian was still smiling at the alderman. His lips did not move. He simply said 1 word, a subvocal command into his comm. "Rook." It was almost instantaneous. The man was still snarling at Aaliyah, his hand raised. A shadow detached itself from the wall. One of Rook's men. A hand clamped onto the man's shoulder, a grip of iron. The man was spun, his arm twisted behind his back in a move of brutal, silent efficiency, and he was propelled, half-lifted, toward the service elevator. He was gone from the floor in less than 3 seconds. The alderman, laughing at his own joke, had seen nothing. Suddenly, a piercing shriek split the air. Whoa! Whoa! The fire alarms, panic, instant and infectious, flashed across the room. The music stopped. A woman screamed. The massive LED screens behind the stage turned crimson, flashing a single word. Evacuate! Evacuate! The herd was about to bolt. Cassian moved, striding to the stage and taking the microphone from the stunned MC. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, one moment." His voice, amplified, boomed with authority. As he spoke, he was tapping a command into his watch. The piercing alarm cut off mid-shriek. The flashing red screens went black, then resolved into a warm, calming amber glow. "My sincerest apologies," Cassian said, his voice a smooth baritone, a pool of absolute calm. "It seems we had a slight malfunction with the artistic pyrotechnics planned for the finale." He smiled, a picture of relaxed control, a slight mistiming. "Please, rest assured, all is well. Enjoy the ambiance." The crowd, desperate for the lie, let out a collective, shaky laugh. The tension broke. The string quartet, after a beat, nervously resumed playing. Aaliyah, however, had not relaxed. She was frozen at the main staircase. Her apron pocket was vibrating, not with a text from the manager. It was from her babysitter, a picture message. It was Nova, standing in the Grand Tower lobby, grinning, holding a hand drag-down card that read, "Congrats, Mommy." The text below it, the new manager, "Mr. Haynes, was so nice. He said it was a family night and arranged a car for us to surprise you. We're in the lobby." Aaliyah's blood turned to ice. "Nova, here, in this building." She looked up, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with herself, and found Cassian. He was already watching her. He saw her face. He saw the phone in her hand. He was at her side in an instant. "What?" She just showed him the screen. Cassian looked at the photo of the small, smiling girl. His expression shattered. The mask of the dawn, the calm of the shepherd, it vanished, replaced by a cold, visceral fury. Children and guns, the two words he never allowed in the same equation. "Rook," he hissed into his comm, his voice a low growl. "Abort peer exfil, abort. New priority, code red, my daughter." He glanced at Aaliyah. "My daughter is in the lobby. I want her moved. Floor 46, the glass garden, now." Floor 46 was his fortress, a soundproof, biometrically sealed sanctuary with glass capable of stopping a .50 caliber round. "They will bring her to us," he said to Aaliyah, his hand hovering over her arm, not quite touching, but grounding her. Just then, his personal phone, the one not on the comms network, buzzed. A restricted number, a text message. It was a photograph, a close-up of the VIP table where the senator sat, taken from across the room. Below it, one line of text. "The next drink tastes like me. Dragogo wasn't just at the gates, he was in the room." The battle had shifted from a physical assault to a war of psychological terror. The elevator doors opened not onto a hallway, but into a pocket of impossible tranquility. The glass garden on the 46th floor was Cassian's private sanctuary, a tri-level atrium filled with tropical plants, a living wall of moss, and the gentle sound of recirculating water. The air was warm, humid, and smelled of earth and jasmine. Aaliyah saw her instantly. "Nova." The cry was torn from her, a sound of pure, ragged relief. Her daughter, 10 years old, stood near a small waterfall, watching the water with a curious, composed expression. Her hair was in its usual neat braids. She turned, not with a child's frantic energy, but with an unnerving, adult-like calm. "Hi, Mommy," she said, as if they were meeting in their own kitchen. Aaliyah fell to her knees, pulling Nova into an embrace so tight it ached, burying her face in her daughter's hair, inhaling the familiar scent of kids' shampoo and grape juice. The elevator doors whished shut. Cassian was there. He had guided her in, but now he was just inside the room, his presence a heavy weight. He unbuttoned his formal dinner jacket, shrugging it off and tossing it onto a stone bench. He was still in his white shirt and black trousers, but shedding the jacket was a signal. The armor of the gala was off. He kept his distance, a good 20 feet, standing between them and the single, steel-reinforced door that was the only way in or out. Aaliyah finally let go, her hands framing Nova's face, checking her for injuries that didn't exist. She looked up at Cassian, her eyes swimming with 1,000 questions. But one broke through. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The pin, the money, why are you helping me?" Cassian's gaze was steady. He didn't offer a simple platitude. He gave her the truth. "Because," he said, his voice low in the quiet, humid air. "There are some people in this world who should not have to suffer indignity just to make others feel tall." The words landed, resonating in the quiet. Aaliyah felt the adrenaline that had been holding her up, the sheer terror of the past hour, begin to recede, leaving an icy void in its place. She started to shake. It began in her hands, a fine, uncontrollable tremor, and spread to her arms, her shoulders. It was the body's delayed reaction to the fight or flight that had been pumping through her veins. Cassian saw it. He moved to a small, hidden service station built into the stone wall. He took out a thick, impossibly soft hand towel, ran it under a hot tap, and wrung it out until it steamed. He walked over to her, his steps measured, unhurried. Aaliyah flinched as he approached. A reflex. He stopped. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't try to put his arm around her. Instead, he held out the warm, steaming towel, gripping only the very top corner of it with his fingertips. The rest was offered to her. It was a gesture of profound, almost prayerful courtesy. He was giving her the warmth, but he was not forcing the contact. Her shaking hand reached out, her fingers brushing his. She took the towel and pressed it to her face. The damp heat was a shock, a profound comfort. Nova, who'd been watching this entire exchange with her serious, old soul eyes, finally spoke. She looked at the billionaire, the Don, a man who commanded shadows, and she asked a question of impossible simplicity. "Are you a good man?" Mr. Cassian, who had faced down prosecutors, rivals, and killers, was momentarily silenced. He looked at the girl, this small, calm center in his storm. He did not lie to her. "No," he said, his voice quiet, "but I am the man who does not let bad things happen." Nova seemed to consider this, as if it were a perfectly reasonable answer, and nodded once. A silence fell, filled only by the sound of water. Aaliyah had lowered the towel, her tremors easing. She felt safe. It was a feeling so foreign, so dangerous in its vulnerability, that it terrified her more than the threats outside. She leaned her head back against the stone planter she was kneeling by. Her scent, a faint, clean note of citrus and something floral, drifted into the warm air. Cassian stood near her, not moving. He was close enough to see the delicate line of her neck, the way a few tiny, rebellious curls had escaped her tight bun to rest at her nape. He watched one small, dark tendril, damp with perspiration, curl against her skin. His throat tightened. He had a sudden, overwhelming urge to touch it, to smooth it back, an urge so powerful it was a physical ache. "I've been watching you," he confessed, his voice a low rumble, barely more than a whisper, intended only for her. She turned her head, her dark eyes questioning. "Before tonight," he clarified. "About a month ago, it was raining, a sudden cold rain during that street festival. I was watching from my car." He looked at the waterfall, not at her, as if the memory were private. "You were working a food truck. Closing up, you saw a homeless man huddled under a flimsy newsprint. You took the heavy vinyl tarp you used to cover the generator, and you drag-a-petted over him. You got soaked closing up." Aaliyah stared at him. She remembered that night, the misery of the cold rain, the ache in her feet. "I tried to find you," he said. "You were just gone. Then I saw you tonight." Aaliyah absorbed this. He had seen her, not as a waitress, not as a target, but as a person. She felt a connection, a thread of recognition that ran deeper than the chaos of the evening. Slowly, she stood up. The space between them was electric. She took half a step, then another. She was standing in front of him now. He did not move to grab her. He did not reach for her. He simply watched her, his steel eyes unreadable, his entire body tense, as if waiting for a verdict. Aaliyah lifted her hand, not to his face, but to his chest, placing her palm flat over his heart. She could feel the steady, strong beat beneath her hand. It was solid, real. He looked down at her hand, then back to her eyes. He was giving her all the control. She rose on her toes, her body leaning into his, and met his lips. The kiss was not a desperate, passionate collision. It was hesitant. It was a question. It was warm, like the garden, and profoundly gentle. Cashin's reaction was slow, as if he was afraid to break the moment. His hand came up, not to pull her closer, not to take, but to rest on the small of her back. It was a point of support, a solid presence that said, "I am here. You are not falling." His thumb moved in a slow, circular motion, a gesture of comfort, not possession. Her own hand slid from his chest, up his neck, her fingers tangling in the short, thick hair at the base of his skull. She felt a tremor go through him, their breathing synchronized, one breath shared in the small, safe space between them. Ahem. The sound was tiny, polite, and impossibly loud. They broke apart, not with a gasp, but with a slow, shared exhale. Both of them turned, their faces still inches apart. Nova was standing 10 feet away, politely examining a large fern. "I think," she announced to the plant, "that I would like a glass of water, if it's not too much trouble." Aaliyah let out a shaky, surprised laugh. Cassian's face, which had been a mask of guarded intensity, broke. A real, genuine smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. The tension, the fear, the romance it all snapped, replaced by the simple, absurd reality of a 10-year-old girl. He stepped back, putting a respectful, necessary distance between them. His gaze was still locked on Aaliyah, but the promise in it was different now. It was deeper. "When tonight is over," he said, his voice firm, "every insult will change its color." A sharp, static-laced bzzzt cut through the air. It was the comms unit on his discarded jacket. He moved to it, his smile gone, the dawn returning. He tapped the earpiece. Rook's voice, flat and urgent, filled his ear. "Sir, we have a breach. Floor 45. 3 gunmen moving in waiter uniforms. They've bypassed the elevator locks. They are advancing on the glass garden. ETA, 60 seconds. The moment Rook's voice cut off, Cassian was already in motion, his calm fracturing into a diamond-hard, cold precision. He grabbed his jacket, pulling Aaliyah with him toward the atrium's far wall, which looked like a solid pane of onyx. "Mommy, what's happening?" Nova asked, her voice not fearful, just questioning. "It's a game, baby," Aaliyah said, her own voice shaking. "We're going to play a game of quiet." "I am changing the script," Cassian said into his comm, his thumb pressing against a biometric scanner hidden in the onyx. The wall slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing not a plush corridor, but a dark, metal-lined service hallway. He hit a panel, and the main lights in the corridor outside the glass garden, the one the Hitmen were ascending, plunged into total darkness. Then another command be a single glowing green exit sign, previously dark, lit up at the far end of that hall. It was a false sign, a lure. "Rook, you are the bait," Cassian ordered. "Lead them to the Helix entrance. 40 seconds. He pushed Aaliyah and Nova into the service passage. "Stay close. Do not talk." The passage was lit only by a series of faint, low-light strips embedded in the floor, glowing in the signature cobalt blue of the Orion house. Aaliyah held Nova's hand, her heart hammering so hard she was sure it was audible. Behind them, she could hear the distant, muffled thud of a door being forced open, followed by the heavy, dry slap, slap, slap of combat boots on the marble floor of the corridor they had just bypassed. The Hitmen were on the 45th floor. Cassian led them, not running, but moving with a lethal, fluid purpose. He didn't look back. He spoke 4 words into his comm, each one a sharp, distinct command in Vesper, the internal Orion language designed for clarity under fire. "Stilla, Vera, Tenny, Sarah. Still, turn, hold, lock. It was a tactical sequence. Aaliyah didn't understand the words, but she felt the shift in the air, as if an invisible net was being dragowned tight around the tower. The message was for his team, now repositioning, a DNA strand of lethal force twisting around the intruders. They reached a heavy steel door. Cassian opened it, and they were plunged into a disorienting, bright chaos. It was the Mirror Maze, a temporary art installation for his Helix Foundation. It was a room filled with floor-to-ceiling polished steel panels, angled to create a bewildering forest of reflections. "In here," he whispered, pushing them toward what looked like a solid wall but was actually a gap. Behind the ficus, a large artificial planting served as a screen. Aaliyah pulled Nova behind it, her body shielding her daughter. She was shaking, and she could feel Nova, small and warm, trembling against her. Aaliyah's mind flashed, not to her own fear, but to a random, strange memory. Nova, a few months ago, after a stranger danger class at the community center, had been explaining child psychology to her. "Angry people are easy. Mommy," Nova had said, with her usual eerie seriousness. "Their brains are loud, so you have to be quiet. They listen to simple words. If you whisper and look right in their eyes." The thought was so bizarre, so useless, that Aaliyah almost laughed. Then, the main door to the maze burst open. The first hitman, a large man in a waiter's uniform that was stretched tight across his body armor, stormed in. He stopped, his gun raised, his head whipping left and right. He was surrounded, not by enemies, but by himself. 100 reflections of a confused, angry man with a gun. The light was designed to fracture, to disorient. "Where are they?" he hissed, turning in a slow circle, his own image mocking him from every angle. Cassian moved. He was not a reflection. He was a shadow. He emerged from a different angle, a place the man's disoriented brain hadn't processed. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the man. It was not a fight. It was a disassembly. One hand clamped on the man's wrist. The other struck the pressure point on his elbow. The brachial stun. The hitman's fingers went numb, his hand spasming open. The gun clattered to the floor. Before the man could even register the loss, Cassian had executed a perfect, brutal handlock, spinning him and driving him face first into one of the steel panels. The man slumped, unconscious, his breath a single, sharp exhale. A second hitman appeared in the doorway, alerted by the sound. Marco. He never made it into the room. A hand Rooks shot out from a recessed doorway next to the maze entrance. He grabbed the second man by his tactical vest and yanked him sideways, pulling him into a different, adjacent room. It was what Cassian's team called a soft trap, a small, completely soundproofed media booth from a now-defunct trading floor, lined with 6 inches of acoustic anechoic foam. Aaliyah heard no struggle. She just saw the man vanish, and the door hissed shut. The sound of his existence was simply erased. One remained. The third man, the leader, was smarter. He didn't charge in. He appeared in the doorway, his weapon low, his eyes scanning, not at the reflections, but at the gaps between them. He was a professional. He was seasoned. His gaze moved, sweeping the room with cold, reptilian patience. It locked onto the cluster of artificial plants. He saw a flicker of movement, Aaliyah's hand, clutching Nova's shoulder. He raised his weapon, a slow, terrible smile spreading across his face. He didn't shoot. He saw Cassian, now standing by the first downed man. His body tensed. This was a different game. The hitman's eyes dropped from Aaliyah's face to her neck. He saw the silver chain. He saw the pendant glinting in the fractured light. Nova. He let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "Nova," he said, his voice a rasp. "Pretty name. It's a shame she'll have to watch this." He looked at Cassian. "You move, Dawn, and the kid gets an education in ballistics." Cassian went absolutely still. His eyes, which had been cold steel, turned black. They became voids, wells of pure, bottomless night. And then, the building's lights flickered. Blink, 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 blink. It was not a power failure. It was a signal. The hitman's earpiece, still tuned to his own network, would be silent, but every executive in the gala, every phone, just received an email. Cassian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to look. He knew what it said. It was the legal trap. Sprung. An automated, time-locked email had just been sent from a server in Zurich to the entire Illinois state legislature, the SEC, and the press. Subject urgent audit request. Lakefront Integrity Bureau. It was a formal complaint. Filed by a concerned citizens group, a shell corporation Cassian owned, detailing how Valentin Dragogo's shell companies were using the Halcyon Gala to launder money into a philanthropic fund. It was the truth, and it was now public. Simultaneously, another text, anonymous and untraceable, was sent to a private network of Chicago's most powerful business leaders. It contained a simple 2-minute audio file. It was the recording from Cassian's watch, Mr. Ivers, the man at the bar, the men near the terrace, all of them. Their voices clear, their insults sharp, their targets Aaliyah, and by extension, the city's working class. Within seconds, the 3 big fish Cassian had been courting for the North River deal men, who were also, coincidentally, silent partners in Dragogo's less legitimate enterprises, were in a panic. They were tied not just to Dragogo's dirty money, but to a public relations nightmare. Valentin Dragogo, monitoring this from afar, suddenly had 2 fires to put out, a legal inferno and a financial mutiny. His men in the tower were no longer an asset. They were a liability. The hitman's earpiece suddenly squawked, a new, frantic voice. "Out, get out, abort mission fast and clean." The hitman's eyes widened. The order was panic. His focus, once laser sharp, was now split. He was being recalled. He was failing. He looked at Cassian, at Aaliyah, his frustration boiling over. "No," he growled, raising his weapon. "No loose ends. A fatal mistake." Cassian said, his voice soft. "He's running. You are staying." The man had entered Cassian's territory, a place of patience and precision, and had just been ordered to hurry. It was the one thing the maze would not allow. The hitman's face, contorted with panic and rage, was a grotesque reflection in the dozen panels surrounding him. The order to abort, laced with his boss's fear, was a deeper insult than the gun at his back. He was a professional, and he was being handled. "You're not going anywhere," he spat, his gun wavering between Cassian and the artificial plants. "We are," Cassian said. His voice was calm. He was not speaking to the hitman. He was speaking to Aaliyah. Now. He moved, not toward the hitman, but to the darkest corner of the maze, a gap that looked like another shadowed reflection. He pulled Aaliyah through, his hand clamped firmly on her arm, with Nova pulled tight against her. They were in a narrow, pitch-black service corridor, barely 3 feet wide. The mirrored panels on one side, a solid, cold concrete wall on the other. At the end, 30 feet away, was a single, steel fire door, their exit. Cassian put his back to the door, his body blocking the passage. He was listening, his head tilted, sensing the vibrations through the wall. He could hear the hitman shouting in the maze, his bootsteps frantic and confused as Rook's men began to systematically, silently, herd him, using light and sound like sheepdogs. The air in the narrow passage was cold, still, and thick with their shared breathing. This was it, the final moment before the end. Aaliyah's hand shot out, grabbing his shirt, fisting the expensive fabric. Her voice was not a plea. It was a command, a raw whisper that cut through the darkness with the edge of a diamond. "Cassian." He looked down. He could barely see her, just the faint, wet gleam of her eyes. "If that door opens, and it's them, if something goes wrong." Her voice was shaking, but her grip was iron. "You don't save me. You get Nova out, you take her, and you go. You promise me." Her words struck him harder than any bullet. This woman who had been insulted, threatened, and hunted was not negotiating for her own life. She was negotiating for her daughter's. The fury of the dawn, the cold precision, it all melted. He was just a man, brought to his knees by a mother's courage. He didn't speak. He leaned in, slowly, deliberately, until his forehead rested against hers. The world vanished. There was no maze, no gunman. There was only this, the single point of contact. Her skin was cool. His was burning. His breath, warm and carrying the faint, lingering scent of cinnamon from a drink hours ago, ghosted across her face, a benediction. His hand, the one that had disarmed a man moments before, came up. It was not a fast, certain movement. It was slow. It hovered, then gently, so gently, cupped the back of her neck. His thumb found the hollow beneath her ear, his fingers threading into the small, damp curls at her nape. It was a question, asked in the most profound silence. "May I?" A single, shuddering breath escaped her. A tear, hot and fast, tracked down her temple. She nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement, a final surrender to this one, impossible point of safety. His lips found hers. It was not the hesitant, gentle exploration of the glass garden. This was a different kind of kiss. It was deep, unhurried, and absolute. It was a seal, a vow, a man staking a claim against the darkness. Her back pressed against the cool, smooth surface of the mirrored wall, the cold grounding her as the heat from his mouth spread through her. His other hand came to rest on her back, his palm flat against her spine. His fingers didn't clutch, didn't demand. They simply spread, tracing the vertebrae through the thin fabric of her uniform. It was not possession. It was reassurance. It was a silent promise. "I am here. I am the wall. You are not falling." Aaliyah answered him. She kissed him back, not with the frantic energy of fear, but with a matching, profound certainty. Her own hands, no longer shaking, came up, one tangled in his thick, dark hair, gripping him, anchoring him, the other pressed flat against his chest, right over his heart, feeling the steady, powerful thump-thump of his life, a solid, living drumbeat against the impending storm. In that tiny, dark passage, they created a shelter. They were two, in the eye of the hurricane, finding a still point of absolute truth. A small, clear, utterly calm voice cut through the shared breath. "Mom!" It was not a cry. It was a statement. "We're okay. I'm not scared." They broke apart, but not with a guilty jolt. They separated slowly, their foreheads remaining close. The kiss lingered, a warm, electric field between them. They both looked down. Nova was standing between them, holding her mother's hand, her gaze fixed on the steel door at the end of the hall. She hadn't been watching them. She had been watching the exit. The pure, uncomplicated bravery of her child did what the kiss had started. It extinguished Aaliyah's last ember of fear. It made them both stand taller. Cassian's gaze, intense and raw, locked on Aaliyah's. His voice was a low, rough growl, a vow meant only for her. "After tonight, I will not let you face that world alone again." Aaliyah's smile, even in the near-total dark, was a small, trembling, brilliant thing. "I don't need the world," she whispered, her hand tightening on Nova's. "If I have this little family—" A single sharp click sounded in Cassian's earpiece. The signal. Perimeter locked, trap set. The transition was immediate. The man holding her, the lover, was gone. The dawn returned. His entire posture shifted into one of lethal, coiled readiness. He stepped in front of them, a human shield. "Hold her hand," he commanded, his voice all ice. "Do not move from this spot." He turned, facing back toward the chaos of the maze. For one single, agonizing second, the world held its breath. The air was still, heavy, the perfect mirror-flat surface of a lake before the first stone. The silence was shattered. The main door to the maze, the one they had entered through, burst open with a crash. 3 black-clad figures. Not waiters, these were Daugher's professionals. They flooded into the room, their movements fluid, tactical. Suppressed weapons were up, muzzles sweeping, their dark, deadly forms reflected 100 times in the disorienting, fractured light. They were silent claws, hunting. The maze was a chaos of fractured light and infinite, menacing reflections. The 3 gunmen, Daugher's professional team, spread out, their suppressed weapons held low, their movements a predatory, synchronized ballet. They saw the downed man, the one Cassian had taken out, and their discipline tightened. The leader, a tall man with a scar that split his left eyebrow, spotted the gap in the corner, the dark, narrow corridor where his targets were pinned. He raised his hand, a fist, signaling contact. His two men fanned out, creating a fatal, triangular field of fire. He aimed his weapon directly into the darkness, at the center mass he knew was there. "Don't move," he growled, his voice a low, confident rasp. Instinct, primal and protective, took over. Cassian didn't think. He shifted his body, a half step to the left, widening his stance. It was not an aggressive move. It was a human shield. The subtle motion repositioned him, placing his own body directly in the firing line, intentionally obscuring the angle to Aaliyah and Nova. The leader's lips twisted into a sneer. He had them, trapped, outgunned, and with a civilian shield. He relished this moment, this final, quiet exertion of power. The air was dead, silent. The world reduced to the 4 feet between his muzzle and Cassian's chest, and into that dead, terrifying silence. A new voice spoke. It was not Cassian's low command. It was not Aaliyah's terrified whisper. It was a voice that did not belong in this equation of violence, clear, calm, and perfectly pitched. "Lower your hands." The commander froze. The voice was coming from the child. Nova had stepped out slightly from behind her mother's leg, her gaze fixed not on the gun, but on the commander's eyes. Her voice was not high-pitched with fear. It was a flat, declarative, and utterly steady. The gunman blinked, his brain momentarily short-circuiting. Nova spoke again, her rhythm measured, as if reciting instructions. "Release the safety. Drop the magazine." She took a small, confident breath. "Step back 3 steps." It was a string of 3 simple, direct commands. They were the exact, cadence-perfect phrases she had learned while volunteering with her mother at a K-9 rescue shelter. She had spent a whole summer watching trainers break through the panic and aggression of terrified animals, using simple, repetitive, low-toned language to establish dominance and create calm. Her child's mind, fascinated by the psychology, had filed it away as a simple truth, loud. Angry things follow quiet. Certain words. She was 10 years old. She was not a victim. She was a handler. Her small, certain eyes, locked on the gunman, conveyed no fear, only expectation. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The brain, especially a brain jacked on adrenaline and tactical training, is wired to respond to clear commands. But these commands were wrong. They were coming from a child, yet they mirrored the structure of an authority figure. The first gunman, the one on the commander's right, instinctively faltered. His fingers, trained for a trigger pull, twitched. His hands, in fact, lowered an inch, a reflexive, confused response. The second gunman on the left glanced at his commander, seeking clarification. That single, a-second glance was a crack in their discipline. The commander himself was paralyzed. His brain was caught in a feedback loop of pure contradiction. The child's calm command to drop the magazine was a direct assault on his power, but his own training screamed at him to obey direct, clear field orders. His hesitation was not just about him, it was about his team. He saw his number 2 look away, saw his number 1 flinch. He was terrified that this break in the script, this impossible, tiny variable, would cause one of them to pull a trigger in panic. Hesitation in a firefight is a disease, and it was spreading like ink in water. Cassian seized the freeze. He had seen it, a moment of psychological gold. He did not shout. He pitched his voice to match Nova's, speaking in the Vesper monotone, a command language engineered in the depths of his organization to override fear and panic. "Shift position," he ordered, his voice overlapping the commander's thoughts. "Release weapon, safe lateral prone." He was reinforcing the child's command, translating it into their language. He was the alpha, validating the handler. The psychological dam broke. Aaliyah, sensing the shift, the men's sudden, brittle uncertainty, added the final, crushing blow. She did not shout. She used the one weapon in the room more powerful than Cassian's command or Nova's calm. "Right now," she said. Her voice was pure, undiluted mother. It was the voice that stops a child from running into the street, the voice that demands and expects and receives obedience. It was warm, absolute, and terrifying in its certainty. It was too much. The 2 wingmen, their tactical brains shattered by this three-pronged psychological assault, reacted. They did not drop their guns, they were too well trained for that. But their hands, as if on their own, moved to their magazines, a click-clack as one man. The one who had flinched first actually ejected his clip. It hit the floor with a dull, plastic rattle. The commander saw it. He snarled, an animal sound of pure frustration, his nerves slipping from their tracks. His authority was gone. Stolen by a child and a woman, he raised his weapon, his own mind breaking from the script. But it was too late. Rook, who had been a shadow in the service corridor behind them, moved. He was not alone. The moment the commander's focus broke, Rook and two of his shadows, all in black, silent gear, exploded from the passage. Rook didn't go for the gun. He went for the man, a blur of motion, locking the commander's arm in a brutal crossbody hold, his other hand silencing the man's shout. As this happened, Nova, the small, calm center of the storm, did exactly as she had commanded. Her eyes, still fixed on the men, watched them being subdued. She took 1, 2, 3 precise steps back, removing herself from the line of action, her gaze never wavering, not a single tear, not a single gasp. She was a trainer, her task complete. The fire door at the end of the hall, their intended exit, burst open. It was not more hitmen. It was the kite team, Cassian's overwatch, flooding in, their faces grim, their weapons ready. They found a scene of anticlimax, 2 gunmen with their hands in the air, a third being silently hogtied by Rook, and a small girl watching them, her expression one of simple, critical observation. The entire engagement was over. Not a single shot had been fired. Cassian let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. He looked at the chaos, the reflections, the subdued gunmen, his own tactical team, and finally, at this impossible child, the most dangerous power in any room, he thought. His heart aching with a strange, new emotion. Is not a gun, it is a calm child. The immediate physical threat had vanished, but the true war had just begun. While Rook and the kite team handled the silent, invisible cleanup, no sirens, no reports, just 3 men disappearing from the tower as if they were ghosts, Cassian was already waging the second, more important battle. The soft counterattack he had initiated was now in full cascade. The email to the Lakefront Integrity Bureau had been the first domino. The second was a meticulously compiled dossier, which had been dormant on a secure server, now anonymously leaked to a specific investigative journalist known for his tenacity. The file was a roadmap of Valentin Dragogo's financial empire, specifically detailing how he laundered illicit cash through the benevolent, respected front of the Midwest Fellowship Council. It was a masterpiece of legal and financial aggression simultaneously. A third file, this one heavily encrypted, found its way to the private inbox of a director at the Interstate Racketeering Commission, the IRC. It was not a tip, it was a full confession, complete with spreadsheets, offshore account numbers, and transaction dates. A quiet, fatal, and non-negotiable investigation began. Far from the public eye, the battle, however, was also fought with perception. The 2-minute audio file of the guests insulting Aaliyah, the one recorded on Cassian's watch, had been packaged. It was just the audio, played over a simple black screen bearing the golden Halcyon logo. It was leaked not to the press, but to a private intranet of Chicago's top financial executives and their assistants. By 9 in the morning, it was the only thing the financial district was whispering about. The investors Cassian had been courting for the North River Port Agreement, men who lived and died by their reputation, were horrified. They were not angry about the insults. They were terrified of being associated with the vulgarity. Meetings with anyone tied to Dragogo's known associates were canceled, one by one, with polite, firm excuses. The 3 guests who had been most vocal in their contempt, including Ivers, found themselves in a vortex of public relations damage. They scrambled to release public apologies, citing intoxication, a night of poor judgment, and profound regret. But it was too late. Several major hedge funds, citing ethical governance violations in their portfolios, quietly and permanently dropped their company's stocks from their investment lists. The men were not just embarrassed, they were financially crippled. 2 days later, Aaliyah received a phone call. It was from the executive vice president of the Halcyon Hotel Group. Apologies were offered, profound and sincere. And then, a proposal. The incident, the VP explained, had highlighted a systemic gap in hospitality training. They were creating a new position, event etiquette coordinator. The job, if she wanted it, was hers. It involved training all staff in de-escalation, professional dignity, and boundary setting. The salary they offered was precise, generous, and intentional. It was, Aaliyah calculated with a shaky hand, exactly enough to cover the tuition at Lakeside Charter Elementary, with enough left over to breathe. That night, Cassian did not take her to dinner. He took her to Mariner's Court. It was not a glittering penthouse. It was a secure, unassuming brownstone complex he owned near the university, hidden behind old brick and reinforced ivy. It has biometric locks on every door, he explained, maintaining a respectful distance as she looked around the elegant, warm apartment. A private subterranean garage, a courtyard that is invisible from the street, a library, and the best security protocols in the city. No one gets in. Aaliyah hesitated. It was beautiful. It was also a fortress. She looked at the reinforced windows, and for a moment, she saw a cage. She was a survivor, not a protected object. Nova, however, had been silently exploring. She walked out of the second bedroom, her future bedroom, and looked at the quiet, tree-lined courtyard. She turned to Aaliyah, her face serious. "It's quiet, Mommy," Nova said, her voice soft. "I think you could sleep here." Aaliyah looked at her daughter. She had not had a full, deep night's sleep in 10 years. She nodded at Cassian. The war was not one-sided. Daugher, cornered and bleeding money, did not go quietly. He couldn't use guns against Cassian, so he used the other weapon of the wealthy lawyers. A high-priced, notoriously dirty legal team filed a countersuit against the Lakefront Integrity Bureau, claiming harassment, entrapment, and corporate espionage. They were attempting to bury Cassian's legal trap in years of procedural delays. When Rook informed him of this, Cassian was in his new home, watching Nova read in the library. He merely smiled. "He doesn't know," Cassian said, "that the LIB is being monitored." He had, months prior, established a private, independent ethics oversight committee for the very organizations he donated to. The battle would not be fought in a courtroom. It would be fought in committee agendas and leaked news items, a slow, methodical constriction, a death by 1,000 administrative cuts. Aaliyah, settling into her new life, was not idle. She was not a kept woman. She was a partner. That night, she told Cassian one evening, Nova used what she knew, but other kids, they just freeze. She proposed an idea. The Nova Fund, a foundation, chartered and independent, dedicated to teaching crisis calm and psychological de-escalation skills to children in inner-city programs. Cassian funded it instantly, setting up a $1 million seed trust. But when the press release was drag-offed, his name was nowhere on it. The founder, director, and public face of the Nova Fund was Aaliyah Brooks. Weeks passed. A cold November rain lashed the city, streaming down the bulletproof windows of the brownstone. Nova was asleep. Cassian stood by the window, watching the city lights blur into a watercolor of neon and mist. Aaliyah came up behind him, her presence a quiet warmth. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she asked. "No," Cassian replied, his voice a low rumble. "But he will be stopped." He turned to her. The reflection of the city lights painted highlights on his face. "Aaliyah, I want this. All of it. This quiet. This home." His eyes, which had once been steel, were now just deep. "But I only want it if you do, too. No obligations. No debt from that night." Aaliyah looked at him, this man of steel and shadows who had given her a shield, and then, more importantly, a sword. "I do," she whispered, her voice thick. "But I need real safety, not the blurred, passive safety of a cage. I need the safety of a partner." He didn't answer with words. He touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. They leaned in, and their lips met by the rain-streaked glass. The kiss was not like the first one in the garden, hesitant and new. It was not the desperate, dark kiss in the maze. This was an agreement. This was the sweet, sharp sting of reality. It was two worlds, two lives, colliding. The lights of the city outside like salt on their skin, a little sweet, a little stinging, and completely, terrifyingly real. The endgame was played on Daugher's terms, or so he thought. He chose Warehouse 17 at the Riverton Dry Dock, a sprawling, rusting graveyard of shipping containers and forgotten machinery. He forced the meeting by staging a gas leak at a nearby chemical storage unit he secretly controlled, threatening an environmental crisis that would tank the North River port deal. He demanded a negotiation, face-to-face, with Cassian. Cassian agreed, but he did not come as a rival, Dawn. He came as a plaintiff. He arrived not with gunmen, but with a civil prosecutorial warrant from the Bureau of Urban Integrity. The BUI, his team, led by Rook, was there, but their primary weapon was a stack of legal documents authorizing the BUI to immediately seal the warehouse as a public and environmental hazard. Cassian was replacing lead bullets with legal ones. Aaliyah was there by choice, 200 yards back in a reinforced SUV, serving as the primary witness for the Lakefront Integrity Bureau. The wind off the river was a high-pitched scream, rattling the metal sides of the containers. Daugher, seeing Cassian arrive with lawyers instead of soldiers, panicked. He had anticipated a war, not a lawsuit. He fell back on his old ways. He had hired a sniper team, just in case. Cassian was standing beside the BUI agent, who was attempting to serve the warrant to Daugher's frantic manager. Aaliyah, watching through stabilized binoculars, saw it first. A tiny, impossible flicker of light on the side of a massive blue steel drum. 50 yards to Cassian's left, it was a laser, the ruby dot dancing in the wind. "Cassian!" Her voice was a shriek over the comlink. "Sniper, move, move!" She didn't wait. She threw her own door open and ran, just as the air where Cassian had been standing snapped with the sound of a high-velocity round passing through it. She grabbed his arm, pulling him down behind the armored hood of his vehicle. The world erupted. Cassian's team deployed suppressive smoke, thick gray clouds instantly obscuring the field. The comms channel exploded into chaos. "Sniper, North Tower. Target is smoke. I do not have a visual." Inside the main armored vehicle, where Nova sat with a child psychologist Cassian had assigned. The girl listened to the panic in the men's voices. She recognized the sound of fear, the precursor to bad decisions. She bypassed the main channel, picking up the small, secondary radio they had taught her to use at the K9 Rescue Club. She keyed the channel for Cassian's team. Her voice, impossibly small and perfectly calm, cut through their earpieces. "Lowered muzzle," she said, the club code for calm down. "Stay still. Count slow." In the swirling smoke, Cassian's men, trained killers and tactical experts, heard the child's voice. They stopped shouting. They controlled their breathing. They stopped being targets and became hunters. The panic instantly vanishing, replaced by cold, synchronized focus. Daugher was finished. His legal trap was sprung. His sniper was blinded. He emerged from the smoke, his face a mask of purple rage. He saw Aaliyah trying to get back to the car. He lunged, grabbing her arm, but he didn't pull a gun. He held up his phone, a thin, black knife to her reputation. "You want to play smart," he snarled, his voice raw. "I have the clips. Doctored, of course. You, at the gala. You, in the glass garden. I'll make it look like you offered yourself to him. I will send it to the PTA president at Lakeside Charter. I'll send it to every parent. By the time I'm done, your daughter won't be able to show her face." Aaliyah, her heart hammering, looked at this pathetic, broken man. He had tried to crush her with insults, then with guns, and now with whispers. She straightened her back. She did not pull away. "You can't," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the wind. "You cannot steal what I am not ashamed of." Daugher raised the phone, ready to hit send. Put the knife down. The voice was Nova's. The door of the armored car had opened. She stood on the running board, flanked by two of Cassian's shadows, her small form wrapped in a coat. She was 75 feet away, but her gaze was locked on Daugher. She used the same flat command tone. Eyes on the ground. Step back 4 steps. It was the psychological fold. Daugher, a man of base violence, was being ordered by a child. His brain, already reeling from defeat, could not process the contradiction. He stared at her. He wavered. He took an involuntary half-step back. It was the hitch, the fatal, final hesitation, in that single, perfect second of stillness. Cassian moved. He did not attack Drago. He grabbed Aaliyah, pulling her back, shielding her. Yelling, "Now!" Rook materialized from the smoke. He was on Daugher in an instant. There was no fight. He simply spun Daugher, clamped his wrist, and applied the matte black helix lock cuffs. Click! As if that sound were the signal. The real attack began, the air filled with sirens. Not police, federal. Dark vans from the BUI and the Interstate Racketeering Commission flooded the dry dock, their lights flashing, sealing the perimeter. They were not there for the sniper. They were there with asset seizure warrants. In one unified, silent move, Daugher's entire financial network, his shell companies, his offshore accounts, the Midwest Fellowship Council was frozen. It was a checkmate, delivered by paper, not by blood. Aaliyah ran to Nova, holding her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of relief. Cassian stood beside them, a solid wall, his hand on Nova's head. Aaliyah looked at his other hand, the one that had been steady for this entire ordeal. It was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor, the first and only sign of the terror he had been holding back. He looked up at the gray, unforgiving Chicago sky, a sky of lead and steel. He had looked into the abyss, and for the first time, he knew he had chosen the light. That night, in the quiet of the brownstone, Nova was asleep. Cassian sat beside Aaliyah on the sofa. He did not kneel. He did not make a grand speech. He simply took her hand. He pressed a small, heavy object into her palm. It was not a large diamond. It was a simple, thick, platinum band, a solid, unbreakable circle. He closed her fingers over it. "I cannot promise you a kind world," he whispered, his voice rough. "But I promise I will stand at the door, every night." Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. From the doorway, a sleepy voice piped up. Nova, who had only been pretending, smiled. "Well," she said, "then our door will always be open for kindness." Far in the distance, a train whistle blew, long and low, as if the entire city had finally, at long last, exhaled. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to connect and share thoughts, so please comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.